Elite professors. Try to embarrass a black student. Have no idea. He's a math genius. Before we dive into the story, please hit the subscribe button. Also, drop a comment and let us know which city you're watching from. We love hearing where our community is tuning in from. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. At Whitmore University, a prestigious institution known for its rigorous academic standards and fiercely competitive atmosphere, the halls echoed with the footsteps of students who carried the weight of excellence on their shoulders. The university's towering stone buildings and ivy-covered walls had witnessed decades of brilliant minds, but they had also harbored darker truths about who was considered worthy of belonging within those hallowed halls. David Washington was different from the moment he stepped onto campus. Not because he tried to stand out, but because everything about him seemed to defy expectations. He had transferred from a small community college, carrying with him a quiet confidence that came from years of self-taught brilliance. While other students worried about keeping up with the demanding coursework, David excelled with an ease that left even seasoned professors speechless. But at Whitmore, where the student body was overwhelmingly white and privileged, David's presence stirred uncomfortable conversations in faculty lounges and whispered doubts in lecture halls. His dark skin and humble background made him a target for assumptions that had nothing to do with his actual abilities. The first signs of trouble began in Professor Catherine Sterling's advanced calculus class. Dr. Sterling, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, had built her reputation on precision and intellectual superiority. She prided herself on being unforgiving, believing that only the truly gifted deserved to advance in mathematics. As David consistently solved complex problems with remarkable speed and accuracy, Dr. Sterling found herself growing increasingly uncomfortable. During office hours, she would scrutinize his work with unusual intensity, searching for flaws that never materialized. Her discomfort manifested in subtle ways: longer pauses before acknowledging his correct answers, dismissive nods when he raised his hand, and an overall coldness that other students began to notice. The situation escalated when Dr. Sterling confided her concerns to her colleague, Professor Michael Brennan. Dr. Brennan, a physics professor with thinning hair and a perpetual smirk, was known for his controversial opinions and his enjoyment of intellectual combat. Unlike Dr. Sterling's calculated precision, Dr. Brennan thrived on chaos and confrontation. "There's something off about this Washington student," Dr. Sterling said one afternoon as they sat in the faculty lounge, surrounded by leather-bound books and the faint aroma of coffee. "He solves problems faster than graduate students I've taught for years. It's unnatural." Dr. Brennan leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "I've heard about him too. Students are talking. Some of them are getting concerned about the curve." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Maybe we should look into his methods more closely." The implication hung heavy in the air. Both professors shared an unspoken understanding that someone like David, young, black, from a community college background, couldn't possibly possess such extraordinary mathematical talent without some form of assistance or deception. "I think you're right," Dr. Sterling replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We can't let this continue unchecked. The integrity of our program is at stake." What they didn't know was that David Washington had been a mathematical prodigy since childhood. Growing up in a neighborhood where books were luxuries and opportunities were scarce, he had discovered his love for numbers at the local library. While other children played outside, David spent countless hours immersed in mathematical texts, teaching himself concepts that most students didn't encounter until college. By age 12, he was solving calculus problems. By 16, he had taught himself advanced topics in number theory and abstract algebra. His notebooks, filled with original proofs and innovative solutions, represented years of solitary dedication to his craft. Mathematics wasn't just a subject for David. It was his language, his art, his pathway to understanding the universe. Despite his extraordinary abilities, David remained humble and unassuming. He had learned early that displaying his intelligence could make others uncomfortable. So he developed a quiet demeanor that allowed his work to speak for itself. At Whitmore, he hoped to finally find a community of like-minded individuals who shared his passion for learning. Those hopes were tested when he befriended Sarah Mitchell, a biology major with warm brown eyes and an infectious smile. Sarah had noticed David in their shared statistics course, admiring how he effortlessly navigated complex problems that left her struggling. One day after class, she approached him with genuine curiosity. "David, right?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah. I have to say, watching you work through those probability distributions was incredible. Do you have some kind of secret?" David looked up, surprised by her friendly tone. Most interactions with classmates felt stilted, as if they were unsure how to approach him. "Thanks," he replied with a modest smile. I really love math. Always have." "Well, it shows," Sarah said warmly. "Listen, a few of us have a study group that meets twice a week. You should join us. We could definitely use someone with your skills." The invitation meant more to David than Sarah could have known. For the first time since arriving at Whitmore, someone was welcoming him based on his abilities rather than judging him for his differences. The study group included Thomas Chen, a computer science major with an engineering mindset and an easy laugh. Thomas had an intuitive grasp of technology and could build complex programs with the same ease that David solved equations. Together with Sarah, they formed an unlikely but supportive trio. "Man, you're like a human calculator," Thomas said one evening, as they worked through a particularly challenging set of problems. "Where did you learn all this?" David hesitated before answering. He had never shared the full extent of his background with anyone at Whitmore. "I taught myself mostly. Started young, spent a lot of time at the library." Sarah looked up from her textbook, eyes wide. "You taught yourself calculus? Advanced statistics? That's incredible." For David, their acceptance felt like a gift. In Sarah and Thomas, he found friends who valued his mind without questioning his right to be brilliant. They studied together, shared meals, and talked late, into the night about everything from quantum mechanics to philosophy.
For the first time in his life, David felt like he truly belonged somewhere. But belonging, as he would soon discover, wasn't something that would come easily. Meanwhile, Dr. Sterling and Dr. Brennan were developing their plan. They decided that
the upcoming Academic Excellence Symposium would provide the perfect opportunity to test David publicly. The symposium was an annual event where students and faculty showcased groundbreaking research, and it would give them a stage to expose what they believed was an elaborate deception. "We'll give him a problem so complex that even we would struggle with it," Dr. Brennan said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "If he's really as brilliant as he appears, he should be able to handle it. If not—" He let the sentence hang, his meaning clear. Dr. Sterling nodded approvingly. "And if he fails, it will raise questions about all his previous work. The Academic Integrity Committee will have to investigate." Neither professor considered that they might be wrong. Neither imagined that they were about to make a profound mistake that would reveal more about their own biases than about David's abilities. The day of the symposium arrived with an electric energy that filled Whitmore's grand auditorium. Students and faculty gathered in the ornate space, with its soaring ceiling and rows of polished wooden seats. The walls were lined with portraits of distinguished alumni, their painted eyes seeming to watch over the proceedings. David sat in the back row with Sarah and Thomas, his notebook balanced on his lap. He wasn't scheduled to present anything. He was only attending as part of his coursework requirements. But something about the atmosphere made him uneasy, as if a storm was brewing just beneath the surface of academic civility. "You seem nervous," Sarah observed, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "Everything okay?" David managed a slight smile. "Just have a feeling something's about to happen." Thomas frowned. "What do you mean?" Before David could answer, Dr. Sterling stepped up to the podium. She adjusted the microphone and surveyed the audience with a confident smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you all for joining us for this year's Academic Excellence Symposium," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "Today, we celebrate the pursuit of knowledge and the power of intellectual curiosity." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room until it found David. "This year, we're trying something special, a live problem-solving challenge. I'd like to invite one of our most notable students to join me on stage." The word notable carried a weight that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "David Washington, would you please come forward?" The auditorium fell silent. Every head turned toward David, who sat frozen, his worst fears suddenly realized. This wasn't a random invitation. It was a trap. Sarah grabbed his arm. "You don't have to do this," she whispered urgently. Thomas nodded in agreement. "This feels wrong, man. You can just say no." But David knew that declining would only fuel more speculation. If he was going to face this challenge, he would do it on his own terms. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and calm despite the racing of his heart. "It's okay," he told his friends quietly. "I've got this." As David walked down the aisle, conversation ceased entirely. The weight of hundreds of stares followed his every step, but he kept his eyes focused straight ahead. When he reached the stage, Dr. Sterling greeted him with a smile that felt more like a predator's grin. "Thank you for joining us, David," she said, though her tone lacked any genuine warmth. "Are you ready for a challenge?" David nodded, his voice steady. "I'm ready, Doctor." Brennan stepped forward, holding a piece of paper with visible excitement. "Excellent. We've prepared a special problem for you, something that combines advanced calculus with theoretical physics." He projected the problem onto a large screen behind them. The equation was a monster of complexity, involving non-linear dynamics and quantum mechanical principles that would challenge even graduate students. Gasps echoed through the auditorium as people realized the scope of what David was being asked to solve. For a moment, David simply stared at the screen, his mind processing the intricate mathematical relationships. Then, without hesitation, he picked up a marker and approached the whiteboard. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. David began writing, his movements fluid and confident. He broke the complex problem into smaller components, identifying patterns and relationships that weren't immediately obvious. His handwriting was neat and precise, each step building logically on the previous one. As he worked, murmurs of amazement rippled through the audience. Students leaned forward in their seats, trying to follow his reasoning. Even some professors found themselves taking notes, impressed by the elegant way David approached the problem. Within 15 minutes, a time frame that should have been impossible for such a complex challenge, David set down his marker and stepped back. "I believe that's the solution," he said simply, gesturing to the whiteboard covered in precise calculations. The auditorium erupted. Students cheered and applauded, while professors exchanged stunned glances. Dr. Sterling and Dr. Brennan stood frozen, their confident smirks replaced by expressions of shock and growing embarrassment. Dr. Sterling forced herself to examine the solution, searching desperately for errors that simply weren't there. Every step was correct, every calculation flawless. David hadn't just solved their impossible problem. He had done so with an elegance that revealed a depth of understanding that she herself might struggle to achieve. But Dr. Brennan wasn't ready to admit defeat. He cleared his throat and addressed the still applauding audience. "That was certainly impressive," he said, though his voice carried a note of desperation. "However, let's not stop there. How about we try something even more challenging?" Before David could respond, Dr. Brennan presented a second problem, this one combining cryptography with advanced number theory. It was designed to be unsolvable in a public setting, requiring not just mathematical skill, but creative intuition and deep theoretical knowledge. David looked at the new challenge and smiled, not with arrogance, but with the quiet joy of someone who had found a puzzle worth solving. He turned back to the whiteboard, and began working once again. This time the audience watched in complete silence. There was something almost magical about watching David work, the way his mind seemed to dance through mathematical concepts that most people couldn't even comprehend. He moved between different approaches effortlessly, combining techniques from various fields of mathematics to create a solution path that was both innovative and brilliant. When he finished, the silence stretched for several heartbeats before exploding into thunderous applause. People jumped to their feet, cheering not just for the solution but for the extraordinary display of intellectual power they had witnessed. Sarah and Thomas were on their feet as well, tears of pride and joy streaming down their faces. Their friend hadn't just met the challenge, he had exceeded it in ways that left everyone speechless. Dr. Sterling and Dr. Brennan stood at the side of the stage, their faces pale and their earlier confidence completely shattered. They had intended to humiliate David, to expose him as a fraud. Instead, they had inadvertently showcased his genius to the entire university community. As David returned to his seat, surrounded by congratulations and expressions of amazement, he felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the ordeal was over, satisfaction that he had proven himself, but also sadness that such proof had been necessary in the first place. "That was incredible," Sarah said, hugging him tightly. "You showed them, David. You showed everyone." Thomas shook his head in wonder. "Dude, I knew you were smart, but that was something else entirely. You're like a superhero or something." David laughed softly, the tension finally beginning to leave his shoulders. "I'm just glad it's over." But even as he said the words, he knew that this wasn't really the end. The symposium had revealed the truth about his abilities, but it had also exposed the ugly biases that existed within the university. The real work of change was just beginning. In the days that followed, David's performance became legendary on campus. Students who had barely noticed him before now approached him with respect and admiration. Stories of his mathematical prowess spread beyond Whitmore, reaching other universities and research institutions. However, not everyone was ready to accept what they had witnessed. Dr. Brennan, stinging from his public humiliation, became obsessed with finding some explanation for David's abilities that didn't involve acknowledging his own prejudices. He enlisted 2 graduate assistants to investigate David's background, convinced that there had to be some form of deception or outside assistance. Dr. Brennan's assistants, Jennifer Park and Robert Williams, began their investigation reluctantly. Jennifer, a meticulous researcher, and Robert, a talented analyst, were uncomfortable with their task but felt they had no choice, as their careers depended on Dr. Brennan. Their research led them through academic records and online archives. They found no evidence of fraud, but instead uncovered something extraordinary, a series of groundbreaking papers published under the initials DW. The papers, on advanced topics in number theory and quantum computing, were revolutionary. This was the kind of work that usually came from established research teams, not a single individual. Yet the publication dates corresponded exactly with David's time before he transferred to Whitmore. "This is impossible," Robert said, staring at his screen in disbelief. "If these are really his, he's been operating at the level of a tenured professor for years." Jennifer nodded. "We need to tell Dr. Brennan, but I don't think he's going to like what we found." When they presented their findings, Dr. Brennan's reaction was predictable. Initial dismissal, followed by pale shock as the facts sank in. David Washington wasn't just gifted, he was a prodigy whose work was already influencing the academic community. Dr. Sterling's response was even more devastating. When she learned the truth, her denial turned to a crushing sense of shame. She had spent her career valuing intellectual merit, yet her prejudices had blinded her to genuine brilliance. The weight of her mistake was a physical burden. Unaware of the storm swirling around him, David continued his life. He noticed the changed atmosphere, conversations stopping when he entered rooms, but tried not to let it affect him. One evening, Sarah knocked on his door. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice serious. "I heard some professors talking. They're trying to figure out how you're so good at math. Some think you might be cheating, David sighed. I figured something like this might happen. People like them will never believe someone like me could be this good at math without some kind of trick. But that's not fair, Sarah exclaimed, indignant. You've worked harder than anyone. You deserve respect. David gave her a grateful smile. I can't control what people think, only how I respond. His calm acceptance made Sarah and Thomas even more determined to defend him. That weekend, David opened up to his friends about his journey, sharing stories of teaching himself from decades-old textbooks. I never expected recognition, David said. I just loved the purity of mathematics. In a world that seemed unfair, math made sense. It was predictable, logical, beautiful. Sarah listened with tears in her eyes. David, what you've accomplished is extraordinary. Most people will never understand how much courage it took. Thomas nodded emphatically. You're going to change the world, man. Their support meant everything to David, reminding him that he had friends who valued him for who he was. But the controversy grew. Desperate to salvage his reputation, Dr. Brennan publicly accused David of plagiarizing his solutions from the mysterious D.W. papers, not realizing he was essentially accusing David of plagiarizing himself. The allegation spread quickly, sparking heated debates among faculty. Some professors rallied to David's defense, while others sided with Dr. Brennan, unable to let go of their preconceived notions. The university launched a formal investigation, calling David in for meetings with ethics committees and academic panels. Each session felt like a trial, with professors questioning his methods, his sources, and his very right to be at the institution. Through it all, David maintained his dignity and composure. He answered questions honestly, provided documentation when requested, and never allowed the stress to affect his academic performance. His quiet strength in the face of adversity only served to further impress those who were paying attention. The turning point came when Sarah suggested reaching out to Dr. Maria Rodriguez, a renowned mathematician whose work David had long admired. If anyone could validate David's abilities and contributions to the field, it would be her. I don't want to bother someone so important, David initially protested. She probably gets hundreds of requests. David, Sarah said firmly, you're not bothering anyone. You're a brilliant mathematician who deserves recognition. Dr. Rodriguez would probably be honored to work with you. With encouragement from his friends, David composed a carefully worded email to Dr. Rodriguez, attaching examples of his work and explaining the situation at Whitmore. He sent the message expecting no response, but to his amazement, Dr. Rodriguez replied within days. Her response was enthusiastic and immediate. She had not only recognized the quality of his work, but had been familiar with the D.W. papers and their contributions to the field. She invited David to present his research at an upcoming national conference hosted by the International Institute for Mathematical Sciences. The invitation was like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in controversy. It represented validation from the broader mathematical community and a chance to prove his worth on the national stage. When news of the invitation reached Whitmore, the atmosphere began to shift. Students who had been uncertain about the allegations now looked at David with newfound respect. Even some faculty members who had remained neutral began to question their colleagues' motives in pursuing the investigation. Dr. Sterling, overcome by guilt and shame, quietly withdrew from the controversy. She couldn't bring herself to publicly apologize. Her pride wouldn't allow it, but she stopped attending the meetings where David's case was discussed. In her private moments, she was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth about her own biases and the damage they had caused. The day of the national conference arrived with fanfare and anticipation. The International Institute for Mathematical Sciences was hosting the event in a prestigious convention center, drawing the brightest mathematical minds from around the world. For David, it represented the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to share his passion with people who would truly understand and appreciate his work. Sarah and Thomas insisted on accompanying him, despite the expense and the time away from their own studies. We wouldn't miss this for anything, Sarah declared. "You're going to make history." Standing before an audience of distinguished mathematicians, researchers, and academics, David felt a familiar calm descend over him. This wasn't about proving anything to his critics anymore. This was about sharing the mathematical insights that had driven his passion for so many years. His presentation was masterful. He began by explaining his unconventional educational journey, describing how he had discovered advanced mathematics through self-study and relentless curiosity. Then he delved into his research, presenting original theorems and proofs that had emerged from his unique perspective on mathematical relationships. The audience was captivated. Questions flew from the floor as established researchers engaged with ideas that challenged conventional thinking. By the time David finished, he had received a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Dr. Rodriguez approached him afterward, her face glowing with excitement. "David, that was extraordinary. Your insights are going to reshape how we approach several fundamental problems in the field." She offered him a research fellowship at her prestigious laboratory, an opportunity that would provide him with resources, collaborators, and the intellectual freedom to pursue his most ambitious projects. News of David's triumph reached Whitmore University within hours. Students organized celebrations in his honor, while the administration scrambled to distance itself from the controversy that had nearly driven away one of the most brilliant minds ever to attend the institution. Dr. Brennan faced formal disciplinary action for his role in the harassment campaign. His reputation within the academic community was severely damaged, and he was placed on probation pending a comprehensive review of his conduct. Dr. Sterling made a more dramatic choice. Overwhelmed by guilt and unable to face the consequences of her actions, she submitted her resignation. In her resignation letter, she acknowledged her failures and expressed hope that her departure would help the university move toward a more inclusive future. For David, the vindication felt bittersweet. He had proven his worth, but the necessity of doing so revealed deeper issues. To tackle them, he, along with Sarah and Thomas, created a mentorship program at Whitmore. It supported underrepresented students in STEM, providing academic help, emotional guidance, and a community where they could belong without having to first prove their right to be there. "Nobody should have to go through what I went through," David told the first group of participants. "Excellence should be nurtured, not questioned and attacked."
The program flourished, creating a pipeline of diverse talent that began to transform Whitmore's academic culture. As David prepared to leave for his fellowship, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The challenges were
painful, but they had also revealed the strength of human connection. Sarah and Thomas organized a farewell dinner. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Sarah said. "Not just that you're brilliant. We always knew that. I'm proud that you never let them change who you are. You stayed kind, humble, and true to yourself." Thomas raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To David Washington, mathematical genius and all-around good guy. Don't forget us when you're famous." "I could never forget you two," David responded, his voice serious. "You believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. That means everything." Years passed, and David's name became synonymous with groundbreaking mathematical research. His work on quantum algorithms and theoretical number theory earned him awards and honors, but he never lost sight of the values that had sustained him. At Whitmore, the changes he helped initiate continued. The mentorship program became a model for other institutions. The university actively recruited diverse talent and created support systems to help all students succeed. The transformation was not perfect, but it was real and meaningful, touching the lives of countless students who might otherwise have been underestimated. David remained connected to Whitmore through the program and regular speaking engagements. Each time he returned, he was struck by how much had changed. One spring, he delivered the commencement address. Standing at the podium where he had once been humiliated, he looked out at a sea of diverse faces. "When I first arrived at Whitmore," he said, "I thought success meant proving I belonged here. I've since learned that true success means helping to create a world where everyone knows they belong. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, students shared their own stories, and faculty members thanked him for helping to open their eyes. Later, Sarah and Thomas joined him for dinner. Their friendship had endured, strengthened by shared experiences. "Look at us," Sarah marveled as they sat in the same cafe. "We actually did it. We changed the world, at least a little bit." David smiled. "We're still changing it. The work never really ends." Walking across campus one final time, David paused outside the library. The building looked the same, but everything else had changed. Students of all backgrounds hurried past, their conversations filled with excitement. This, David realized, was true victory. Not the moment he had solved those impossible problems, but this quiet evening when diversity had become so normal. His story was proof that talent could emerge from anywhere, and that genius knows no boundaries, only the infinite. Potential of the human mind unleashed in the service of understanding and hope.